Hi guys, it's Mary. I know I'm a little late for this, but I've decided to do the Draw My Life tag for you guys. Just a little warning, they will not be this good. I don't have time for that. And please ignore that little flare in the bottom of the screen. I couldn't get good lighting without removing my lampshade. Alright, let's begin. So I was born December 7th to my mother, Mary of Guise, and my father, who was James V of Scotland. Fun little fact about me is that I was actually born prematurely, but otherwise I was pretty healthy. Unfortunately, the same can't be said for my father, and he passed away 6 days after I was born, which made me the Queen of Scotland. Since I was still a baby, I needed regents. My first one was Cardinal Beaton, and then it later became the Earl of Arran. When I was about 6 months old, King Henry VIII of England proposed that I marry his son, Edward. He did so through the Treaty of Greenwich. It basically said that when I turned 10 years old, I would move to England and marry Edward, and that a political union would be formed between Scotland and England. However, if the two of us failed to provide children, then the treaty would be deemed null and void. Unfortunately, a couple of Scottish merchants were traveling across England, and Henry had them arrested and impounded their goods. Thus, Parliament sort of freaked out and refused to honor the treaty, rejecting it. That really ticked off Henry, which started a process called the Rough Wooing, which was basically a military campaign in which he tried to get me to love his son by laying waste to Scotland. Needless to say, it didn't work, and I was not a child bride. Yet. A little while later, the reigning king of France, who was Henry II, proposed that I marry his 3-year-old son, Francis. Now, my then regent liked the idea, so that meant that when I was 5 years old, I was sent to live in France. I went on a ship from the French fleet along with my own court, which included 2 of my illegitimate brothers and 4 other girls named Mary. It's a recurring theme. When I got there, people loved me. They thought I was beautiful and smart and vivacious, and yeah, I'm drinking Red Bull there because I don't know how to draw vivacious. I learned to play the lute and how to horseback ride and other rural activities. The only real problem was that Francis was a year younger than me and much shorter, but I was happy. A little while later, we were married. Meanwhile in England, Henry VIII had just died and his crown had gone to his oldest daughter Mary, who then died and gave the crown to Elizabeth. Now there's controversy over whether or not that crown should have gone to me instead. As a result, Elizabeth doesn't really take too kindly to me. Back in France, Henry II was killed in a jousting accident, which meant that he was no longer King of France. Instead, the crown went to my husband, Francis, thus making me the Queen Consort of France along with the Queen of Scots. And this marker just died, so I'm getting a new one. Speaking of which, when I was 17 years old, Francis passed away, and I was absolutely devastated. And I was no longer the Queen Consort of France. Instead, the crown went to his younger brother Charles and his mother, Catherine de Medici. So with nothing left to tie me to France, I moved back to Scotland. However, no one had told me about the Catholic and Protestant issues over there, and when I got there, I was confused. I did some weird things, like I charged John Knox with treason and then revoked it almost immediately, but in general, I was pretty tolerant to the Protestants, which spelled bad news for my Catholic supporters. Once I was all settled back in Scotland, I was ready to start looking for a new husband. The first option presented by my regent, the Archduke of Austria, was rejected by me. The second, Don Carlos, was rejected by his brother, Philip II. And the third was a man offered to me by Queen Elizabeth, but he rejected me. I also had a little bit of a run-in with a French poet who was found underneath my bed, claiming he had the intention of surprising and professing his love for me. I banished him from Scotland, and he refused to listen, and later ended up sneaking into my room while I was undressing. I had him sent away, and long story short, he was executed. And that was when I met Henry, or Darnley, my first cousin, and it was love at first sight. Plus, he was 6 feet tall to my 5'11", which was pretty cool. And we were married soon after. Elizabeth tends to think that I only married him to spite her, but I honestly didn't. I wasn't trying to manipulate anyone, I just loved him. Unfortunately, that started to wear off when I realized how arrogant he was, plus he wanted my crown in the event that I died, and that wasn't cool with me. The worst thing he did by far was when he was jealous of my Italian secretary Rizzio, he had him stabbed to death at one of my parties. And so our marriage became bitter, and I started exploring divorce options. However, it turned out I didn't need to because a little while later, while he was sleeping, there was an explosion at Darnley's castle. He was found dead the next morning, but the interesting thing is that he wasn't killed by the explosion. He'd been strangled to death. It became sort of a murder mystery. A lot of people assumed it might have been me, but a lot of the suspicion immediately fell on James Bothwell. However, he got out of it because Darnley's father forgot to provide evidence at his trial. A little while later, he asked to marry me, and I said yes. Being a noble, I assumed that the nobles would support him, but they didn't. On the other hand, the Catholics didn't either. I was pretty much alone and made a lot of enemies. Needless to say, they separated us and we were both individually imprisoned. I myself was put into prison in Scotland and was forced to give my crown up to my then 1-year-old son James, who, by the way, was always a pretty fabulous baby. Bothwell managed to escape Scotland, but was captured a little while later. He slowly went insane and then died. I myself fled from Scotland as well to England, seeking the protection of my cousin, Queen Elizabeth. I hoped our family bonds would prove strong, but they didn't, and instead I was put on trial for my husband Darnley's murder. Okay, so maybe that's a little inaccurate since I wasn't actually allowed to attend the trial, but what I do know is that they provided 8 documents called the casket letters, which were said to prove my guilt. If you ask me, they're fake, but it doesn't matter, because my fabulous son James destroyed them all and no one will ever know the truth. Regardless, I still wasn't allowed to go home and remained imprisoned in England. While I was there, I was accused of plotting to assassinate her. Thus, I was tried and found guilty of treason, which meant death. I was executed, and it wasn't really a pretty sight. I lost my head, and it fell off, and I lost my wig. It was messy. So, that begs the question of how I'm writing this, and don't ask. Because the answer is that I'm a ghost. Boop. That leaves my son James I in charge of Scotland when I die, and as for me, well, I'm here, making these videos and enjoying every view and subscriber that I get. So, that's my story. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and as usual, thanks for watching.